Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to the Dark Matters radio show with Sorceress Cagliastro, Blood Sorceress, Pioneer, and Necromancer in the Hands of Nine, for a discussion of all topics related to blood sorcery, necromancy, the science of sorcery, and related work of manipulation of energy. Each week, the Sorceress Cagliastro and Chris Rogue Ostrowski will explore topics designed to reveal what cannot be seen. Tonight's topic is necromancy. We'll explore how we talk, work with, and honor the Disincarnate. If you have a question, join us in the Dark Matters chat room on Blog Talk Radio, and we'll do our best to get your question on the air. Our first two shows will only be an hour so we can get to know you, our audience. And now, here are the Sorceress Cagliastro and Chris Rogue Ostrowski.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Hi, Chris. Are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I just want to say a few words and welcome everybody to the new format of this show. When I decided to begin the radio show again, I thought now that I'm teaching quite a bit, the teaching work sort of covers that lecture aspect of the work, and where we can talk about things intensely in a not as let's just say not as broad gaze with not quite as big an audience. So I thought it would be exciting to have an opportunity to get back on the air with Chris and Mary and get in here and talk about things that people want to talk about, because the work is so vital, and to open it up, have a chat room, and get the story out there. The first 2 weeks are only going to do an hour, so we can get to know our audience, but also so we can sort of get a flow amongst ourselves. I don't know how many of you know Chris. Chris Ostrowski is someone I got to know through online media and enjoyed very much his point of view on things. So I asked him to join me in this endeavor because my understanding of him is that he has enormous life experience and he's walked, so let's just say, many of the tentacles of this path. Wouldn't you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah.
And you know what I appreciate so much is your openness and your clarity and the way you stand strong in your point of view. And I really look forward to having an opportunity to share that with this listening audience, both live and archival when people get a chance to sit down and listen to the show. And I also want to acknowledge Shotgun Mary Dalbo, somebody else I sort of recently got to know over the last year. She happens to be a brilliant divinator. And Mary, I want to thank you for stepping in and taking on the task of producing this show. That's very exciting that you're doing that. So here we are tonight, and I thought a good place to start would be to discuss necromancy, as that is the area of study in my work that I think that I probably get the most questions about. And let me just say a few words about necromancy to get the ball rolling. I am in service to the Disincarnate. I've said that my entire let's just say life's work in this thing, and also during my entire more public career in this work. And by in service to the Disincarnate, what I mean is that there is not a point at which their needs don't take priority for me. So when we talk about necromancy, this is a subject that is very close to the center core of the importance of my work. And there's so much out there, there's so much mishandling of the attempt to communicate with the dead that I want to make a point tonight about talking about that. And I look forward to your questions. So, Chris, do you want to say anything before we start talking about what's in the chat room, et cetera, et cetera?
Just, I agree with what you said. That you see so much on television about the ghost hunters and the different movies and things like that where they're trying to talk to spirits, and it drives me nuts. It's like a joke that I saw about being in a 500-year-old castle and trying to talk to the spirits in English.
Yeah.
Yeah. What makes you think they're going to want to talk to you, number one? And number two, if you come in yelling and screaming, I mean, ghost hunters and all, some of them are the worst as far as threatening ghosts. And you come in my house threatening me, I'll shoot you.
And I know you mean that, Chris.
It's like, think about what you're doing, people. And it's like, you want these ghosts to perform, you want them to do things so you know they're there, and then what do you do afterwards? It's, oh, okay, see you later, bye. Now, where's any kind of tribute, any kind of thanks, anything that you're going to give them for participating with your shenanigans, number one, and for any kind of knowledge that they give you. You're not giving back anything. Well, no wonder nobody wants to talk to you.
Chris, somebody recently asked me, I was asked to be involved in looking into whether this young man was truly possessed, and that was an issue of a demonic thing, not a member of the Disincarnate, and there's a difference, of course. And they said to me, well, are you going to film it if you do it? And I said, well, why would I do that? And it was kind of startling to this family that I was not going to require that. I said, well, if you want me to film it for your own usage, of course we can do that. But I wasn't coming in there with a camera crew. I don't look at an interaction with the Disincarnate as an opportunity for self-promotion. It's a strange kind of thing for me. Even when you see people in cemeteries and anywhere where the Disincarnate are anchored, and of course they're everywhere, but there are places where they are truly anchored. When I go and pick up my daughter from school, we often drive through this wonderful cemetery near her school, and the very first thing we do is we take a moment. We just think and we be quiet and we hear what's going on and show them respect. We're in their house. So your point is well taken. There's a very big difference between creating a portal and opening so that they can communicate with you, and that it is easier and clearer on both sides than a very disrespectful experience of going in and demanding an interaction. What do you think, Mary?
Well, it's funny because some of the discussion in the chat room was saying that there's a particular show, Ghost Lab, I guess, which is really bad at bullying potential spirits. Oh. And I think, really when you go into someone's space, or a space that really isn't even occupied by humans anymore, you just have to be respectful, and going in and demanding that they speak to you, this is not how it works. And I don't understand why people feel they need to do that. It's a relationship that can be cultivated, and I think it's something that people really should do the right way in order to get the communication that they'd like to get. So it's really people going.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's people going in untrained, really.
Well, the thing is that the Disincarnate are, and I know this because I've spoken to thousands of them. Yes, the word was thousands. They are more of who they are when they are in the state of being disincarnate than they are before death. And by this I mean that if someone is an extraordinarily happy or outgoing person, they tend to express that even with less boundaries when they're in the experience of being disincarnate. And if they're angry people, they tend to be angry as disincarnate. So they are not that different. They are just without boundaries. They are without the constriction of time and confusion. So they are really very available to be truthful about who they are. So when I teach, we talk about how to communicate with the disincarnate. There's a number of things that we do. We do a portal to someone we know. We do a portal to the energy of someone we don't know. There are many ways to train for this kind of thing if you have in you a desire to do so. But I'm also careful about who I teach. I say no to 3 or 4 times as many people as I say yes to. So the importance of this thing is very powerful. You wouldn't want someone to be communicating with members of your family or individuals who you've had a lifetime of experience with once they're disincarnate by shouting and snapping clicky noises on some electronic device and photographs. It's not for us to do that. What's going on in the chat room?
Well, it's interesting because now there's really some chat going on around these ghost hunter shows. And, Darren's saying these shows are scripted and edited for ratings from the general public. They're not real. What do you think about that, Sorceress? Do you think that the shows are scripted? Are they a little bit of both? Is it, quote, reality?
Well, there are what's called format shows where they have to get something on tape. And if they're not getting something on tape, which they're not getting, then they have to stick in the kind of interaction that people will want to watch. Unless you're a performance artist, nobody wants to watch you sit quietly and hear voices in your head for an hour. The truth is that is more what it is like when you're speaking to the disincarnate. So I think they are heavily formatted, and I think Darren's probably right about that. What were you going to say, Chris?
It's like Honey Boo Boo does ghost hunting.
Yeah. That's
oh, no. Don't give them any ideas, Chris. Do not give them any ideas.
Really? Really, Chris, now I'm worried.
Like you said about being more free when you're dead and more like yourself. Like, there's a lot of people that are going to regret the day I die.
Well, I often think about the party that's going on around Sylvia Brown. And, I am not exactly known for my ability to not speak my mind. And she was a horrific nightmare of an individual when it comes to how she handled the disincarnate. I don't think she ever heard the voice of the dead in her entire life. And the delivery of discussing what was going on with them and talking to their families in the way that she did, 50% of the time wrong. Anybody could be 50% of the time wrong. I think it was probably higher than that. But I think that, to your point, Chris, there is a definite experience where people get to, if not get even, get clear. And I think that quite a bit of that will go on for her in particular because she misrepresented them so horrifically. And there'll be more of that.
Yeah, but
I think the only thing she communicated to was dead presidents.
Dead presidents?
Yeah, the ones that are on dollar bills.
Oh, yeah, those dead presidents. Chris,
Lincoln,
I'm not,
Jefferson,
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes those kinds of comments escape me, so please feel free to point out to me exactly what you're saying. I don't always catch on to those kinds of things. But thank you. What were you saying, Mary?
I was just going to say, what do you think our fascination is with the disincarnate? In order for these shows to work, in order for them to be out there, I think there has to be a demand. There's a fascination with trying to communicate with the dead, and what do you think that people want to do that for? I mean, there's a lot of reasons.
Because dead is the baseline. It's the common denominator. It's the thing everyone becomes. And I think that any kind of desire to understand or communicate with a particular individual is really a broader gaze at looking about what will happen to your own experience when you die. People come to me all the time and say to me, can you just talk to the dead for me? And I'll say, well, who do you want to talk to? And sometimes they'll just say, I just want to talk to them. I just want to know what's happening. I just want to know what they're experiencing. That is not an uncommon request. So over decades of this thing, the data tells me, the data is always what I go to, and the data tells me that people are afraid. They're afraid to die. And they don't want to go in blind. They want information. And, if we could just leave for a second this concept of these shows and talk about what people want to hear. People want to hear that their loved ones or people they know are either all right or getting what they deserve. I hear that, too, quite a bit. And they want to know what's happening, what's going to happen to them. They want to know if there's truth to somebody being there to greet them. They want to know all that. And, Chris, do you experience that when people ask you to help them get that information?
Yeah, it seems like the biggest thing that people are afraid of, they want to know that what they're hearing is true. They want to believe in pearly gates. They want to believe in beautiful pastures. They want to believe that there's, 150 people standing around them when they go to the other side. They want to see the light at the end of the tunnel, all that stuff that they've been told, and it's like they need that pat on their back.
Yes,
they need that reassurance that, hey, it's going to be like that. I had a gentleman that I was trying to help pass. He had many health issues, but he didn't want to go. He was a devout Catholic, and from what I could get from what he was telling me was that it didn't look right. And I just sat there and I was thinking to myself, it's like, one of you son of a bitches better show up looking like the Virgin Mary pretty goddamn soon, or I'm going to come in there. Just something. I think that's what people have to know. They need to know that that's on the other side. It's that whole thing. If it's not there, then I wasted my life. I didn't do things I wanted to do because there's supposed to be a reward there. Well, if it's not there,
that question of having one's beliefs substantiated is very powerful. You're absolutely right about that, Chris. People say all the time, but am I going to get my reward? Am I going to? Will I not be in pain any longer? I get this one a lot. The Disincarnate tell me that pain is not really an issue. They're not as involved in the physicality. I had a client who's been living her whole life with rheumatoid arthritis, enormous amounts of pain. When she became a member of the Disincarnate, she was in her late 80s. This was about 10 years ago, and she said to me, "I've been in pain since I was 16. I don't want to be in pain anymore." And I thought that was very powerful, and I said, well, here's the data. They expressed to me that physical pain is off the table. They have not yet expressed to me that emotional pain is off the table, and many of them are very caught in this sort of tryst with a particular moment that they live over and over, and they're trying to settle out. But my understanding of the data is that physical pain is off the table. And she said, she didn't really care so much about what it was supposed to be. That was the thing that she really wanted to know for sure she wasn't going to have to encounter anymore. Have you heard things like that from people asking those questions?
Yeah. I had a woman that was dying of, she had lung cancer, and she was wicked. And she had been fighting this, I guess it was like 3-4 years. And she came in, she said, I don't care, I don't want to suffer anymore. She was tired of it. She gave up on the chemo and everything. She said, I just want to go. And she said, I don't want pain anymore. She said, that's all I care about.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not, physical pain you're not going to have. Now, I've heard otherwise about, like you said, about emotional pain. There is some of that, or they wouldn't hang around places that they do.
Yes, I agree with you. They do certainly hang around. This concept of haunting is something I wanted to talk about tonight. The idea that the Disincarnate stay in a place or stay with a person, the language for that is often the word haunting. And I find that I'm very uncomfortable with that word. A couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I was on a radio show with a super Christian demonologist. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. And he had all sorts of nonsense about all demons were evil and, the cold in the room. And I just felt like he was reading to me from his script of The Exorcist or some crazy nonsense like that. And he said to me, oh, yes, well, the first thing you do is you decide whether that this is a disincarnate, or he didn't use that word, that's my word, or if it's a demon, and then you thrust them out. And I said, well, let's talk about that for a minute. Why do you thrust them out? First of all, I know you don't, but what makes you think you have the right to do that? I like to stand up for the rights of, as crazy as that sounds, for the disincarnate, because sometimes we're in their house. Sometimes we built our house where their dream house used to be. Sometimes we build our house over their graves, or where they baptized their kid if they were into that. We step all over that, and that is the experience of the generational growth of the human race. There are more of them, if you do the math. More people have died than are alive. There are more of them than there are us, if you want to include them, if you want to look at categories like them and us.
Until the zombie apocalypse.
Until the zombie apocalypse. And this is why I love you, Chris. This is why I reached out and said to you, please get on the radio with me. And I mean every word of that. So to think that we have a right to shove them out, or this awful go into the light business, it's anathema to what it is that they come to us for. They come to us because they want to be heard. They come to us sometimes with a specific task or request they want us to do for them, complete a task or tell somebody something. Or people come to us because they want to ask them questions. Living people come to us because they want to ask the disincarnate questions. So we don't have a right to say you don't belong here anymore. It's absurd. What do you think about that, Mary?
Yeah, I think they have to be treated with respect. And it's funny, one of the things that came up in the chat room, Frank said, I didn't think they actually contacted anyone on these TV shows. He always thought it was for entertainment. And they don't do any favors by shooting in that funky Blair Witch camera, night vision insanity that they shoot in. And I think that's totally true. It's just so disrespectful all around. And it's funny, Darren came up with a question, too, which I think is really true. And I'm sure Sorceress and Chris, you guys, we all know this from working with the Disincarnate, but what are the ethical ramifications of contacting the Disincarnate for public entertainment?
Yeah, thank you, Darren. First, let me say something about what Frank said, which was brilliant. My work is based in physics. I believe in nothing, absolutely nothing. If I cannot see it, it is not real for me. I'm not trying to create an environment of truths that are not based on that which I have not seen. So when you talk about these dank Blair Witch Project kind of camera works, as Frank so eloquently put, the universe is 70% dark matter and 30% not dark matter. I don't like to use the word light matter because it brings a different connotation. And in that 70% dark matter, what I have discovered, again, data, is that the Disincarnate have either more of an ability to show up in the dark, or our eyes have a better structure in which to see them in the dark. That is what I've discovered. That does not mean I don't see them in the daytime in bright light, outside in sunshine. Of course I do. But I think when it comes to bringing them in and asking them to be part of something, or the larger group of them that I see on a regular basis, nighttime is better for that. It does not require crumbling steps, mold, or buildings that are falling apart. If you want to see the Disincarnate at night, all you have to do is be alive and awake at night, and you can see them. So his point is well taken. And whether or not those shows are built to see people, I don't know if they are or they aren't, but I know that those guys are not doing it. And if they want to talk to me directly about that, I'll tell them they're full of shit. And I never say words like that on the radio, but I'm going to say that right now. The Disincarnate are not in those rooms. If they were, even on TV, I would see them. And the clicking EVP is someday going to get them very hurt because demons don't like it. So, yeah. And do you want to take any of that, Chris, before we go to Darren's point?
I would, just on plain science, it's a fact that we don't see what we should right from, looking straight on. Sometimes we have to look at it at a sideways glance or in reduced lighting. So there's scientific grounds to back that statement. As far as the EVP part, now this is just me thinking out loud. I'm not a physicist and I'm no scientist, but if there's energy, if you were reduced to energy when you're disincarnate, and you introduce another kind of energy to it, I would imagine there's a major disruption there. So using some kind of device like that would just have to do something. To me, it'd be almost the equivalent of running your nails down a chalkboard.
Yes, I agree with you. Well, because we don't know what they're made out of. Theoretical physicists tell us that there are subatomic sized particles that we know exist that we can't see. That's what they tell us. They tell us that when they use a super collider and they run that thing and they try to make it all visible, after 1,000 tries, sometimes they get one tiny particle that sort of convinces them that one theory might be true. And that's not in any way putting down their process. That is their process. That is their scientific process of how they look at what's in these tiny particles and what we can and cannot see. My question about that and what they're made of and why they are not on, well, first of all, we know why they're not on tape on those shows because none of that's real. Because these are, I want to say actors, but I like actors, so I don't want to insult them by saying these guys are actors. I will call them buffoons. And if they have an issue with that, they can contact me directly. what they're doing is they create this electronic static, and anywhere you go, if you have highly sensitive instruments, and also being in these dark, dank places, will create all sorts of reaction in these electrostatic sensitive machines, because humidity changes in those places, pressure changes in those places. But we don't know what the disincarnate are made out of. I know that I see them. I know sometimes I see them as clear as a living human being, and sometimes I see them in a transparent kind of way. So they have to be made out of something, because if we see them, therefore they exist, and if something exists, it has physical weight. And, the hubris of thinking because we don't know what to call it means we don't know what it is, that it doesn't exist. That's not solving the question of what it is that we're seeing. So when they walk into walls and they disappear and all those sorts of things, they're doing what they do in their state of physical being. If that didn't exist, that would be a separate subject, but it does exist, and these guys cannot capture it on tape because it is not happening where they are. That's really the story. Mary, I think there was a question that Darren had.
Yeah, we actually have a couple, but we'll start off with Darren's. Darren had asked, what are the ethical ramifications of contacting the disincarnate for public entertainment?
Well, Mary, you've been in class with me, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen in class, specifically classes when we talk about demons and this kind of thing, where they show up and I have to quiet them down so that we can continue class.
Mm-hmm.
You know that my connection to all of this sort of thing is very real, very in your face, and just how I live. And there's plenty of evidence of that. I could probably make a lot of money very quickly if I wanted to get on TV and produce that and let it be seen. I'm so often offered the opportunity to do so. People contact me to do TV shows all the time. If I did a TV show, the only kind of thing I would do is on the science of sorcery. And to pre-disappoint my audience, I would not parade the dead out in a manner so that they could be seen in this vulgar way, demanded to be shown. But what would most likely happen is my presence in doing work would cause them to show up. And in that sense, they would be there of their own accord and making that choice, and that would be different. So I think it is extraordinarily unethical to go into anyone's home and demand they make themselves present in this vulgar, hissy fit kind of way. And I think that it's just a violation of the human experience. Chris?
Yeah, and I disagree with the part on especially on those shows, and I'm really disappointed that they drug in one of the people that I'm not going to name names, but they started on one of the shows casting people, casting out the spirits, invoking the name of Jesus Christ and all this stuff, and I'm thinking, what the hell are you doing? It's like they're there for a reason. It's like, look, no matter where you go on the face of this earth, I don't give a damn where you're at. The earth has been around for 4 billion years, at least. There's going to be a dead body somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, something died right where you're standing, okay? Get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're not going to cast it out. Why are you trying to invoke another dead person and cast out another dead person? What, do you think they're going to beat up each other on the other side?
Well, you know how it works, Chris. Jesus good, all dead bad. You know how it works. That's the way it is. That's the way it is. At least all the dead that we're talking to, we have proof of, except for that one. I'm a big fan of the fact that the whole thing is a myth. So, I give no stock in that kind of thing. Produce a body, produce a DNA line, and maybe we'll talk about whether or not this individual stood on a mountain and talked to people. But I've made this very clear from the very beginning. This entire, to base one's life on a myth, in my mind, is absurd. But that's what they do. They use the Jesus thing. I call them the prayer people to come in. And, Mary's probably laughing now. She's heard me say that a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
But they come in and they say, the power of Christ and all this business. And I'm thinking to myself, two things are going on. First of all, this is nonsense. And I have a complete accepting of the fact that it's nonsense. I will not budge on that. And second of all, even if you have a belief, which is a dangerous thing, if something is not fact and you can't see it, believing in it creates a wide chasm of confusion and lack of opportunity. So even if it did exist, if the disincarnate that you're speaking to, or the demon, whenever it's used in exorcisms, if they didn't believe in that, then what difference does it make what you're shouting? It's irrelevant. It's like when you go to court and you put your hands on a Bible. For me, that could be a pile of comic books. It wouldn't make a difference. I'd be like, sure, I can put my hand on that. Now I can say anything I want because this is nonsense. And that's just because I have no belief, but people of different religions putting their hand on a Christian Bible, it's absurd. This fundamental belief that we should all believe, it is an ugly thing. And to your point, Chris, this Jesus this and Jesus that stuff, well, yes, it was just Easter weekend, so I feel really good about mentioning the fact that I think the whole thing was just a mess.
Yeah.
No one's surprised.
No.
It just gets me nuts when they bring in people that are quote unquote pagan or have alternative beliefs, and they whore themselves out for that. It's like, do you need money that bad?
Well, you know what it is, because I think it's worse than that. I don't think it's about the money. Because people who do reality shows, unless they become very, very popular, probably don't make that much money. I think it is to be thought of as this thing, and for years I just did this work silently without involving myself in a more public aspect of it, and not until recently was I even willing to do that, because for exactly that reason, because the privacy of the work is so vital. But I think that's what it is. I think that they want to be thought of as ghost hunters, as some sort of warriors. But the problem is that there's nobody to fight.
So,
like, what, are you going to go beat up somebody that's disincarnate? Oh, yeah, you're a tough guy.
Good luck. Good luck.
What's going on in the chat room?
There's a lot of great questions, I have to say. There's the next question is from, and I want to make sure I get his or her name right, Togashi Monk. And the question is, as one who believes in the disincarnate and would like to learn to see them, is it possible to, as Chris states, quote, see them out of the corner of your eye, end quote? I often feel them around me and speak to them, but would like to have a face to the energy, so to speak.
Sure, it's very possible to learn, especially if you feel like you're already, and thank you for the question, by the way, especially if you feel that you're already in the perception zone, per se. You're already sort of seeing them and catching glimpses of them, which means that they have perceived you to be someone that they can speak to. There are, I've been teaching now for a while, and there are definitely ways, there are definitely techniques that we can use to open up a portal to the disincarnate. One of the ones, and I'll just speak briefly on it, is to recreate a moment with the disincarnate that we knew of. It is a good way to open the portal and have an understanding and acceptance of the way it works, where we replicate exactly that moment that we had with that individual before they died, and allow for the scene to be appropriate and exacting to remind them in, and then we use blood sorcery. It's not quite that simplified, but that is really the basis of it. And if you want to learn about that, then contact me on my website, and I'll be happy to set up a way that I can show you how to do that or talk about it. But the thing is that if they are sort of in your periphery, they are already accepting you as someone who can see them. And it is more than out of the corner of your eye, and what has to happen is you have to quell your own fear as well, because the disincarnate know that human beings are basically afraid to see them. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't have that kind of weight to it. It's just a thing. And when we become comfortable with, which is what the way that I instruct individuals in it does, is creates a comfortable place for you to see them, a comfortable place for them to be seen, then they start presenting themselves more and more. and those blocks come away. Wouldn't you say that's what we've been talking about in some of those classes, Mary?
I would, yeah. I think, what Tagashi Monk has also brought up is just, he knows that there's fear and he knows he shouldn't have fear and how to get past that. And I think it's just really becoming more comfortable. It's spending time with them. Wouldn't you say, Sorceress? I think it's, interacting with them. You have to do it.
Anything that is challenging to our physicality can create a thing that people express with the word fear. I have my ideas about what fear is, and I think fear is just discomfort or not knowing what steps to take next. Fear is confusion. Fear is a moment without planning. It's all of those things. It isn't really anything more than that. And when they get into our periphery, or when we feel them but don't see them straight ahead in the way that we want to, our fear comes up and they can tell. And it's, to his point, he said he should not be afraid. That's not really how it is. The fear is the thing called fear is a natural response to being around that which is disinclinate. It is a normal reflex. We have certain reflexes that keep us out of danger, and in our primitive mind, that which is dead is distasteful and needs not to come near us. So making a commitment to break through that fear is very useful. I think that's the way to go. You have to create that sort of comfort zone. What do you think about that, Chris?
I was, I guess, lucky, if you want to call it that. I had 2 times in my life that I was clinically deceased. And I came back. So I and they were at an early age. The latest was when I was 4. So I had to spend most of my life listening to what they were trying to pound into my head about what happens on the other side, when I was sitting there going, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Because that ain't what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So I really didn't have a fear of the dead, so to speak. It was almost like, okay, it was like me going to the next door neighbor. There was nothing there. It would be no different than me going and knocking on somebody's door. But
that comfort gave you a lot of skills then.
Yeah, I didn't have to worry about, don't go to the grave, no, don't go to the cemetery. Oh my God, there's people up there. Yeah, so what are they going to do?
Well, that veil that people talk about, and I don't really like that word, but it had been lifted for you.
Yeah, there was nothing there that I didn't see before. I'm like I tell Naomi, I'm more afraid of my, looking at my bank account than what I am to walk around the cemetery at night.
Yeah.
You want fear, look at my bank account 2 weeks after payday. That's fear.
Well, Chris, when we get to talking about sorcery, maybe I can help you figure that out. It's a different thing. But tonight is Necromancy, so let's stick with that. I'm very glad that you told that story, Chris. You mentioned it to me once, and I didn't know, if you wanted that to be publicly known. And that is a wonderful thing, because you are not afraid of the dead because you've been one of them, pretty much. And, once you've put your toe in that water, then it becomes a very easy transition to be back and forth. I personally have seen the dead my entire life. I saw them. I never remember not seeing them. There were long periods of time where I kept saying, why isn't everybody else talking to her, this kind of thing. And there were 2 large disincarnate animals who spent a lot of time with me when I was very, very young. So I never had to learn. And I tell people this all the time. I never had to go through the experience of figuring out how to do this. So the only way that I can teach it to you is by hearing what the disincarnate have told me they want to have happen. And because they are extraordinarily melancholy, they are very well served by replication of incident, as I had mentioned before. They're also very into the scent, and by scent I mean I would like the listening audience to use a broader gaze on this word. but the sense of human blood. When they are around human blood, they become more apparent. If you take the word apparent, apparition, and you look at the etymology of that word, where it comes from, when something becomes more apparent, it becomes clearer and you can see it better. The presence of blood, as they have shared with me, and by blood I mean what I'll call instant or living blood, where you make an incision or you use some sort of puncture device and bleed and ask to see them. This brings them to you because they have a melancholy about having a human body. And nothing creates more of a reaction in human beings than the presence of blood. It doesn't matter if it's a paper cut or a car crash. We stop when we see blood. And it's because blood, and I'll get into this more next week when we talk about blood sorcery, but it's because blood allows us to know that we're alive, and when it's out of the vessel, gets out, it means we're a little bit less alive. So the disincarnate are very attracted to this experience where blood is in the air, especially fresh blood, new blood, and especially when you make that incision so that you can honor them and ask them to come towards you. Remember, tonight we're talking about the disincarnate, not demons. It's a completely different subject. So one of the other things that you can do is when you are in the presence of desiring, and I won't say attempting to or trying to, because those are all words about not getting it done, but when you're in the presence of the desire to communicate with the disincarnate, one of the things that they are very comfortable around is the presence of newly harvested human blood. So I would suggest that those of you who are struggling with getting across this boundary of fear, once you cut into your skin, and it's not about quantity, it's just about seeing blood come through the vessel of a previously intact skin. Once you do that, the energy goes into the harvesting. You're no longer afraid because you just cut yourself, and now you're in a different place. And this can open up a more comfortable, relaxing experience for the disincarnate to show up. Thoughts? Anybody in the chat room want to talk about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion around. Morgan brought up a great question, and I want to make sure that I get this right. So he said, when starting out on the path of the necromancer, what techniques can you use to avoid being overwhelmed by a sudden influx of disincarnates? And I can vouch for this because this happened to me. Can you regulate the amount of contact you have with them?
No.
And
is there more to the question?
Yeah, and then
I have more to the answer, but is there more to the question?
Well, he did, and then he said this brings up another question because that created some discussion in the chat room. He said, is it wiser to gain access to attending demons first, then try to open yourself to the disincarnate, or vice versa? So there's been some discussion around working with demons to help with the disincarnate, or just understanding, how they work with the relationship with the disincarnate.
Well, whoever this is, he's read my work and understands what the benefit of attending demons is. And I think that this is something we should talk about soon, maybe a little bit next week as well, when we talk about blood sorcery. It is very important to have some layer of protection between yourself and the influx of the disincarnate. I do not mean that the disincarnate are dangerous, although I'm sure there are a few who were extraordinarily angry or volatile in life and are now more angry or more volatile in this experience of being disincarnate. Attending demons are extraordinarily helpful in crowd control. And when you open the portal to a disincarnate that you know and you close it, this can be controlled. When you open a portal to the disincarnate that you don't know, this is much harder to control. There are temporary portals and something that I refer to as an eternal portal, which is all the time. In my life, there are disincarnate around me all the time. Right now, there are disincarnate around me. I see them all day. They used to push me to the point where I couldn't get any sleep or anything like that until we negotiated that my attending demons would get between me and them. So if you work the kind of portal where you open it to a disincarnate that you know, and then you remember to close it, by which I mean acknowledging their presence, thanking them for being there, telling them that for your peace they need to not interact with you unless called upon to do so. They might be standing right next to you, and more likely going to continue standing right next to you, but they might not interact with you. They must have some kind of control about how much you can hear or see them, because they seem to be able to regulate that. So if you are concerned about the influx which Mary has experienced, then I would say that the portal to the individual that you know in a controlled environment is a good thing. And yes, the bringing on the evocation, the entree to having your attending demons connect to you and find out who they are and work with them first is definitely, in my mind, the preferred first step. Long answer, short question, sorry.
No, and it's interesting because now we're getting questions around, well, when you mentioned the harvesting of blood, and, someone asked, what about doing that? Bloodletting, is it going to bring people to you that, you shouldn't have around you?
Yeah, well, if they're going to come to you, they're already there. Mm-hmm. And, yes, there are definitely some control mechanisms. And Mary, if you take some notes on this and remind me, we can start blood sorcery next week with this discussion. Because this is a longer, more specific thing, and I want to be able to take the time to do that so that the living humans can be served with this information as well as the disincarnate, because you know that they're listening. And you know that they are right now involved in trying to communicate with some of the very people who are listening.
It's true. It's true. So another question we had was, which I thought was a great question, was Ava came up with this one. I have always wondered if the language is a barrier when speaking with those that have passed before our modern language.
Yeah, it is. Chris was commenting on that before. Chris, do you want to take that, and then I have some things I want to say about it?
I've found that depending on how far back you're going, I mean, you got to remember, we've only been using our brand of the English language for, maybe 200, well, not even 200 years. So it's relatively new. Like I said before, if you're going into a 500-year-old German castle and you're going to talk to these people in English, guess what? It ain't going to work. They ain't going to know what the hell you're saying, because even 500 years ago, the English didn't sound like this. I mean, you've got to remember that there was so many mixtures of language during that time. I mean, some of the Middle English from back before Revolutionary times had a little bit of German in it.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of Celtic in it. It didn't sound like it does now. So if you think you're going to go in and talk to George Washington about an iPad, it ain't going to happen. You've got to...
Go ahead. Finish what you were going to say, because I have to tell you that was so well said that if you don't put that up as a status, then somebody else is going to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to add to that. If you remember one thing, remember this one thing when it comes to necromancy. The disincarnate are more who they were alive when they are in the state of being disincarnate. They are exactly the same person. There is more of them. In my by this I mean they have a sense of being grander and larger in their own truth. Therefore, if you got off the bus in a tour in Japan, you would not walk up to a person who's Japanese and expect them to understand what you're saying in English. If you think of the disincarnate in the same way, if you treat them the same way, if you understand that your communication with them may not be verbal, that there might be gesturing, that there might be a sense of understanding through facial expressions, that you may, if you become very skilled at this, then an interpreter is always a useful thing, no matter on who it is that you want to speak to. If you remember one thing from this show, one thing, remember that they are exactly who they were, only they are freer to be more of who they are. So just apply that. And to Chris's point, you can't talk to George Washington about an iPad, which might be the only thing I think about after this. Hey, Chris. And then, which I love so much. Then if you remember that, and if you show them respect, and if you realize that you are coming up against another human being, and you have to communicate with them in the way that you would expect to communicate with a living human being. Then you will figure out a method in which to make that communication valid.
And also, if I might add, that you have to remember their rank in life. If you're talking to a common person like you were, then fine, it's okay. You talk to them like you talk to somebody else that lives down the street from you. I keep going back to George Washington. If you're going to talk to George Washington, guess what? You're going to have to talk to him a little bit different. He was a general in the Army. He was president of the United States. You're not going to talk to him, hey, bro, what are you up to? It's not the same. You've got to show a little bit of respect. These people were used to that in their days when they were alive. They were used to that. That's what they felt entitled to it. That was the protocol of the times. You've got to do a lot of research before you go in there and start trying to talk to people. Number one, they'll ignore you. Number two, they won't understand what the hell you're saying. And number three, both of you will be frustrated.
Chris, people ask me all the time to talk to people of that caliber. They say, can you talk to Napoleon? Napoleon was a big one for a while. Everybody wanted to talk to Napoleon. I don't know why, but they did. And what I discovered was that individuals who are called upon constantly are less likely to respond. They seem to either have a true understanding of how to operate being disincarnate, or they're exhausted by the questions. When we talk to people who are less well-known, who have more of an experience of being able to wait, have patience, people who have not had such a big life in that sense, they are easier to communicate with. They are more willing. They are fresher in that sense and more available. So if you want to talk to Cleopatra, first of all, you have to pick which one you want to talk to. But you are more likely to be able to talk to her handservant, because that just seems to be the nature of the way it is. People are more who they are when they're dead. Why should people who lived in a mental state of being royal be beckoned like that? It doesn't work quite the same way.
Well, you could talk to Cleopatra, the one that was a stripper during the 20s. So it all depends on how you're asking. So you got to be careful with how you express people.
That's the one you want to talk to, Chris. We know that.
Probably. I'd probably get better answers out of her anyway.
Well, this brings up. I was going to say this brings up a really good point, because I think when we were putting together the show, we were talking about spirits that get bothered a lot. Like say the folks that are at ground zero or someplace where there was a tragedy. And then versus the folks that are in, cemeteries or places that don't get talked to at all. And really, working more with those folks that really don't get a lot of attention. I think, Chris, you were talking about this, right? Did you bring this up at one point? Or what are your thoughts on it, at least? Because I think that, sometimes people get tired, like you said, Sorceress. Napoleon must be exhausted by this point because we've asked so many questions.
Well, like I said, I compared it to, and I'm not picking on anybody, honest. It's just my exposure. I've been to Wiccan ceremonies, rituals, whatever you want to call them, and they rattle off a whole list of names for the goddess that they're praying to. Well, that's the equivalent of me sitting there going, Mom, 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 Mom. How would you feel? How long do you think that's going to last?
Well, if you accept goddesses as individuals who are alive before, then yes, that makes perfect sense. But you mentioned, Mary, graves and places that haven't been visited. One of the things I tell people to do when they're trying to open up the ability to see the disincarnate is to go to cemeteries. And not because it's cliche, but because that's where they last saw people caring about them. So they revisit. It's not because their body is there. It's because they had their last completely focused exchange with the people who cared about them or the people who were their caretakers in that place. So they return there. And go find a grave that has been completely ignored for years. something that's gone to disrepair, and tend to it. But don't do it once. Do it as a commitment. Keep it going. Try to make the disincarnate whose final burial place that is for their physical remains understand that you're coming there to start a relationship. You're coming there to be a caretaker. You're coming there to show a desire for communication. This is a very powerful thing to do. And after you've started putting it back together, cleaning it up, showing reverence, leaving your blood there will be very useful for you to get that particular disincarnate to communicate with you. Not because you left blood on the grass over a casket that's probably buried 6 or 8 feet below. Not because of that. Because you made a sacrificial choice to injure yourself and to harvest your blood and to give life back to that moment. They know that. They care about that. They come to it. And they offer you an exchange. And sometimes the only exchange you'll get is a moment where they'll stand there and they'll look at you, and you know that you are having a human, let me say the word again, human connection. This is not an inhuman connection. This is not an animal. It is not a demon. It is not an entity. It is not whatever kind of other thing you experience or believe in. This is a human being. A human being who lived a life, whether it was 10 minutes or 100 years, who went through the experience of death, which we will all experience. So that means that this person already knows something you don't. So show respect to that. And all they might want to do is share a glance with you. And if that happens to you, then consider yourself to be important in that moment because you've been chosen to have that experience. I know that we're almost out of time, and I just want to say a really quick thing. I say that I live in service of the disincarnate, and I mean that. And this last question actually brought us to a great place, Mary. Thank you for showing us this question in this time. And I want to say that it is so vital, so incredibly vital that we show respect to the disincarnate because they are everywhere. There are more of them than there are of us, and we every day walk on their backs. I don't just mean in terms of burial. I mean the things that they've done before us are the things that give us the life that we have now. So if you are intending to become a person who does necromancy and who wants to learn to reach across that barrier and be part of that and open that portal, then remember that the first word that you must say to yourself before you begin any process is respect. And I want to thank you, Chris and Mary. And Mary's got words to bring us out. But I want to thank Chris and I want to thank Mary. I want to also acknowledge all the time I spent on the air with Chris George and his participation in communicating these bits of information. I want to thank him for having me on so many times, and I hope we continue a relationship in that way. And I just want to now let Mary take us out and thank everybody who has become part of tonight's audience. And moving forward, next week we're going to lean a little bit more on blood sorcery. Thank you. Go ahead, Mary.
And thanks, everyone, for joining us for this week's edition of the Dark Matters radio show with the Sorceress Cagliastro. To reach the Sorceress, you can find her on Facebook under Sorceress Cagliastro or at CagliastroTheIronRing.com. Chris Roga Ostrowski can be reached on Facebook at Christopher.Ostrowski.9 or on his Tumblr at rogue-warlock at tumblr.com. And I can be reached on Facebook as Shotgun Mary or on my Tumblr, theshotgunmary.tumblr.com. So please follow us on Facebook at the Dark Matters Radio Show with Sorceress Cagliastro. Join us again next week when our topic will be blood sorcery in the everyday world. It's not just for the darkness anymore. Good night, everyone, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. And just one more thing I want to say, Mary, I love the way that you say my name. You're a real Italian. Some people say Cagliastro. It's easier to find me that way, but I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mary. Good night.
Thank you for having me on.
It's
been an honor.
Good night, everyone.
I look forward to more ahead. Thank you, Mary. Good night.
Good night.